Today on TimesCast, thousands of protesters take to the streets in Yemen, destabilizing one of the Middle East's most impoverished countries and a haven for al-Qaeda. And from Egypt, using social media to get the word out about ongoing protests. A new caucus meets for the first time in the Senate.
There's not one Republican here who does not understand that they would not have won the election without Tea Party support.
And an overnight storm makes this the snowiest January on record for New York City.
And there's more coming.
A wave of protests take hold across the Arab world, from Tunisia to Egypt and now to Yemen, where demonstrators want to overthrow the government, a key ally of the United States in the war on terror. Anthony Shadid reports from Beirut.
The protests that we saw today in Yemen were some of the largest the country has seen in a long while. There have been protests beforehand, but the numbers were remarkable today. Some estimates went as high as 16,000, perhaps even more. And there was a vow on the part of organizers that these protests would continue. The core of those protesters gathered in Sana'a, the capital of Yemen. Many of them were demanding the actual fall of President Ali Abdullah Saleh. Now, he's been in power for more than 3 decades. Others were calling for reforms of his government ahead of elections in April and ahead of another presidential ballot that's going to happen in 2013. Yemen is a fractured country. There's a secessionist movement in the south of the country. There's a rebellion in the north. The country itself has become a haven for militants from al-Qaeda. And there is a concern, I think, on part of some of these opposition activists that if protests go too far, if change happens too fast, then there's a risk of things falling apart in a country that's never really held together all that well. Opposition lawmakers in Parliament had initially adopted the color of purple. Purple was a sign of protest, of calling for change. They made a decision to use pink as a color in these demonstrations. The idea was that pink was a color that would suggest love and forgiveness. The colors may change as the protests go forward. You know, one thing that the organizers have made clear is that these protests will continue. And I think tomorrow, Friday, is going to be a remarkable day in a lot of Arab countries. We've seen calls for protests in Egypt and Jordan and Yemen. In Yemen, I think these protests will by all means probably continue tomorrow. But I think we're going to see this being a weeks-long process as we go toward the election in April.
Despite the Egyptian government's efforts to crack down on social media sites, bloggers have found ways to post. Robert Mackey spoke with a recent university graduate in Cairo who has been busy attending protests and tweeting about them.
So far, what's your role been in the protests, and what's your feeling about how social media has played a role, if it has?
Well, pretty much I'm just like many Egyptians here. My role is to be part of this wave of change, and I'm taking part of it also as an activist. So I tweet a lot while I'm in the protest. I'm telling everybody the security situation. If any arrests are happening, I'm reporting it. I'm contacting any lawyers in any of the human rights organizations we have here so they can follow up with people arrested. It's important for me to be kind of like a citizen journalist because our press here is certain, not everything gets broadcasted.
There's obviously a lot of talk about protests tomorrow. What are you expecting to happen tomorrow?
I'm expecting a lot of people to be on the streets because people are persistent, and because of how the government and the police is responding to these protests with really violent acts, throwing tear gas, rubber bullets, using water cannon, arresting and beating people. I'm expecting that people are persistent. They have shown persistence. So tomorrow there's a call for 1 million people all over Egypt to go out and take part in the protest in the streets following the Friday prayers. And I think it's going to be even greater than Tuesday.
Is the Tea Party still a force in America?
The new Senate Tea Party Caucus held its first meeting in Washington today. And there's a lot of cheerleading, but so far there are only 4 members. Rand Paul of Kentucky, Jim DeMint of South Carolina, Mike Lee of Utah, and Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, who actually just joined this morning. There were a bunch of other Republican senators who were elected with Tea Party support in November, but so far they haven't been eager to join. Marco Rubio, Kelly Ayotte of New Hampshire, Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania.
I don't care whether this group consists of 3 senators or 100. We've invited them all. I hope they'll all join us.
There are probably a couple of reasons for this. One is that since senators have to run statewide, they tend to be a little less eager to associate themselves with just one faction of the party. Another reason is that since senators are one of 100 instead of one of 435, and the rules in the Senate allow for individual members to have a lot more power, individual members don't need a caucus as much in the Senate as they do in the House, where it's really hard to get something done just by yourself. The Tea Party Caucus in the House, for instance, which was started by Michelle Bachmann last year, has almost 30 members now. The 4 Tea Party Caucus members are still hoping to attract some of these other members to their caucus, especially getting someone like Marco Rubio to sign on would be a big coup for them since he's such a national figure already. But they say either way, size doesn't matter. They expect to be a force regardless.
And the East Coast was covered by more than a foot of snow last night, making this the snowiest January ever recorded for New York City.
Last time I see that much snow was in 1978.
It's hard. This guy's been stuck here all night. Just like I told them on CNN the last blizzard. The mayor's not up on his game.
Just lost traction. They haven't plowed the street yet. Well, they're working on it. They're working on it.
I thought it was going to be bad, but this is just really a nightmare. And there's more coming.
You gonna help us or not?
Join us again tomorrow for TimesCast.